In the cold void of space, the silence was absolute, unbroken even by the quiet glide of starships converging on the celestial station of Nexus Prime. Under the watchful gaze of 1 billion stars, Nexus Prime stood as a crossroads for intergalactic diplomacy, its giant orbiting rings alive with the glittering lights of ships from across the galaxy. Captain Arjun Voss stood at the command deck of the Terran warship Sovereign, his gaze fixed on the sprawling station ahead. His crew moved with quiet efficiency around him, their faces lit by the soft glow of control panels, every officer attuned to the gravity of their mission. "Status report!" Arjun's voice cut through the low murmur of activity, clear and commanding. "Sovereign is cloaked and on approach, sir. All systems nominal," replied Lieutenant Harrow, his eyes never leaving the radar. The Sovereign was a newcomer, uninvited and unknown to the assembly of alien diplomats gathered to negotiate peace terms. The human delegation wasn't expected, least of all aboard a warship rumored to possess forbidden technologies. Arjun knew the rumors, spun from fear and ignorance, only hinted at the truth. As the Sovereign slipped silently into a synchronous orbit with Nexus Prime, Arjun felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation. This summit was to broker peace among rival factions, whose hostilities spanned eons. His ship's sudden appearance would stir a maelstrom. "Initiate the broadcast," he ordered, his voice steady. On the command screen, the faces of various alien leaders flickered to life, their features ranging from the insect-like mandibles of the Threx to the shimmering fluid forms of the Aquarids. Each leader's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion as they recognized the human insignia emblazoned behind Arjun. "Esteemed leaders," Arjun began, his tone neither apologetic nor defiant, "I am Captain Arjun Voss of the Terran Alliance. We come in desperate times, bearing truths you must hear before this council proceeds. Our presence is unauthorized, but necessary." The chamber on Nexus Prime erupted into chaos, voices clashing over the communication link. Arjun's declaration had indeed changed everything. As debates raged, he remained a calm epicenter, ready to unveil secrets that could either ignite war or forge an unprecedented alliance. Behind him, the Sovereign loomed large and silent, a sentinel among stars, its very existence a challenge to the fragile peace being brokered. As Arjun watched the turmoil unfold, he knew the path to peace was more perilous than ever, but necessary all the same. The human warship at this galactic summit wasn't just a participant, it was a catalyst. As the debates intensified, Captain Arjun Voss stood resolute, his keen eyes scanning the cacophony of alien ambassadors projected before him. Their voices, a discordant symphony, clashed in the cool, crisp air of the Sovereign's command center, each species expressing their dismay and skepticism. "Captain Voss, your ship's presence here is not only inappropriate but provocative," hissed Slar, the reptilian representative from the Scaled Confederacy, his forked tongue flickering with each sibilant. Arjun's response was measured, his voice a calm counterpoint to the growing hysteria. "Ambassador Slar, we recognize the tensions our arrival may cause. However, the urgency of our message regarding the stability of this quadrant outweighs protocol." Beside Arjun, Lieutenant Harrow monitored the communication channels, his fingers gliding over the sleek console with practiced ease. The soft clicks of his keystrokes were barely audible over the rising din of alien dialects. "Our sensors detect an increase in your ship's power core. Explain this at once," demanded Lear, an ethereal figure whose body rippled like water, reflecting his mood in shimmering waves of blue and green. Arjun nodded to his science officer, a taciturn man named Gregor, who swiftly brought up a visual data stream. It displayed the innocuous energy fluctuations of the Sovereign, visible only to those who understood the intricacies of Terran engineering. "These readings are normal operational levels for us," Gregor explained, his voice a rough grumble like gravel underfoot. "Our warship poses no threat unless threatened." The taste of tension was palpable, a tangy sharpness that lingered on the tongue as Arjun continued to broker understanding. The aroma of brewed coffee wafted from the crew's mess nearby, a small comfort amid the storm of diplomacy. Let us not derail the peace talks with unfounded fears, Arjun added, hoping to steer the council away from brinkmanship. Our intentions are transparent. We wish to discuss a potential threat that jeopardizes not just humanity, but all civilizations present here. A murmur swept through the chamber, the earlier anger giving way to a cautious curiosity. The Aquarid ambassador, whose form shimmered with each word, softened his tone. If what you say holds truth, Captain, we are willing to listen, but ensure your proofs are as solid as your convictions. Thank you, Ambassador, Arjun acknowledged with a nod, feeling the soft fabric of his uniform shift with the movement. He turned to Harrow, whispering, "Prepare the full briefing and make sure every datum is corroborated." As the alien leaders whispered amongst themselves, Arjun's gaze fell upon the star-studded void outside, the silent witness to so many unspoken threats. The vastness of space, with its cold, indifferent beauty, was a constant reminder of why they had come so far. "We will proceed with the evidence shortly," he announced, his voice a clear, resonant bell in the hushed anticipation of the council. The challenge was monumental, but the first steps toward understanding had been taken. Now, more than ever, Arjun needed to bridge the gap between fear and trust. A task as daunting as navigating through a field of asteroids, but just as critical. With the council's eyes fixed upon him, Captain Arjun Voss felt as if he were under the harsh glare of a supernova. His every move scrutinized, his every word weighed. The anticipation was palpable, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. "Let us now examine the specifics of the threat," Arjun began, his voice firm, projecting calm and command. Lieutenant Harrow activated the display, and a series of complex diagrams and celestial maps unfurled across the screen, showing star systems and trajectories that crossed into known space, paths that suggested a silent, creeping danger. "These are not random patterns," Arjun continued, pointing to the arcs that intersected at various colonies. "They are predictive models based on movements we've tracked, movements that suggest a deliberate strategic encroachment towards densely populated sectors." The room darkened as the projections took on a life of their own, stars and nebulae swirling around them. It felt like standing in the void itself, surrounded by the cold breath of the cosmos, each breath revealing the fragility of their collective existence. "This," Arjun said, gesturing towards a pulsating red line that terminated at the edge of the galactic core, "represents an anomaly, repeated bursts of energy that are inconsistent with natural celestial phenomena. Our experts," he nodded towards Gregor, who stood ready with data pads filled with quantum readings and astrophysical analyses, "believe these are test firings of a weapon of devastating power." Murmurs filled the room like the rustling of leaves in a windstorm, as the representatives digested the implications. The Aquarid ambassador's form fluctuated more rapidly, his liquid skin mirroring the turmoil of his thoughts. "Your evidence is compelling," the ambassador finally said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "But why would such a threat go unnoticed by our own sentinels?" Arjun met his gaze directly, the soft light casting shadows across his determined face. "Because, Ambassador, the technology used is unlike anything we've encountered. It cloaks not only the weapon, but also the energy it emits. Only through the lens of human innovation, a different spectrum of analysis, were we able to detect and interpret these signals." Gregor stepped forward, offering a tablet to the ambassador, who inspected the scrolling data with a flicker of his bioluminescent body. "These readings were taken from multiple points," Gregor explained, his tone reserved yet persuasive. "They align with disruptions reported by your own outposts, previously attributed to sensor malfunctions." The metaphorical weight of the situation settled around them like dust from a collapsed star, each particle a silent testament to the gravity of their situation. Arjun watched as understanding dawned on their faces, the reality of a common enemy knitting together former rivals. "As you can see, we stand on a precipice," Arjun concluded, the taste of urgency bitter on his tongue. "This weapon, whatever its origin, could destabilize not just a region but our entire galaxy. Cooperation among all species is not just beneficial, it is essential." The silence that followed was profound, each leader lost in the vast implications of Arjun's words. The scent of fear was as distinct as ozone after a storm, sharp and clarifying. As they absorbed the depth of the peril, Arjun knew this was the moment. His chance to unite them in a cause far greater than any one world or species. In the quiet aftermath of his revelation, Captain Arjun Voss watched as the seeds of understanding slowly germinated among the assembled leaders. Their earlier apprehension was now tempered with a cautious curiosity, each ambassador absorbing the gravity of the shared threat with a pensive silence. The Threxian delegate, whose chitinous exterior usually bristled with aggressive spikes, seemed to soften, his barbs retracting slightly as he leaned forward. "Captain Voss, if your claims are substantiated, we must discuss the nature of our collaborative response." "Indeed, we should," Arjun agreed, his voice resonating with a resolve as unyielding as the metal walls that encased them. He turned to his communications officer, a young ensign named Milo, and nodded. With a deft flick, Milo transmitted a series of encrypted files to the Council's central console, each file a detailed dossier of the threat assessments and strategic countermeasures. As the data streamed in, the soft glow of the console illuminated the faces of the Council members, casting long shadows that flickered like the doubts that had once clouded their judgment. Arjun continued. "Our proposal includes a joint task force, shared intelligence, and coordinated defense systems. It's imperative we act swiftly and decisively." The room darkened as the projections took on a life of their own, stars and nebulae swirling around them. It felt like standing in the void itself, surrounded by the cold breath of the cosmos, each breath revealing the fragility of their collective existence. "This," Arjun said, gesturing towards a pulsating red line that terminated at the edge of the galactic core, "represents an anomaly. Repeated bursts of energy that are inconsistent with natural celestial phenomena. Our experts," he nodded towards Gregor, who stood ready with data pads filled with quantum readings and astrophysical analyses, "believe these are test firings of a weapon of devastating power." Murmurs filled the room like the rustling of leaves in a windstorm, as the representatives digested the implications. The Aquarid ambassador's form fluctuated more rapidly, his liquid skin mirroring the turmoil of his thoughts. "Your evidence is compelling," the ambassador finally said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "But why would such a threat go unnoticed by our own sentinels?" Arjun met his gaze directly, the soft light casting shadows across his determined face. "Because, Ambassador, the technology used is unlike anything we've encountered. It cloaks not only the weapon, but also the energy it emits. Only through the lens of human innovation, a different spectrum of analysis, were we able to detect and interpret these signals." Gregor stepped forward, offering a tablet to the ambassador, who inspected the scrolling data with a flicker of his bioluminescent body. "These readings were taken from multiple points," Gregor explained, his tone reserved yet persuasive. "They align with disruptions reported by your own outposts, previously attributed to sensor malfunctions." The metaphorical weight of the situation settled around them like dust from a collapsed star, each particle a silent testament to the gravity of their situation. Arjun watched as understanding dawned on their faces, the reality of a common enemy knitting together former rivals. "As you can see, we stand on a precipice," Arjun concluded, the taste of urgency bitter on his tongue. "This weapon, whatever its origin, could destabilize not just a region but our entire galaxy. Cooperation among all species is not just beneficial, it is essential." The silence that followed was profound, each leader lost in the vast implications of Arjun's words. The scent of fear was as distinct as ozone after a storm, sharp and clarifying. As they absorbed the depth of the peril, Arjun knew this was the moment. His chance to unite them in a cause far greater than any one world or species. In the quiet aftermath of his revelation, Captain Arjun Voss watched as the seeds of understanding slowly germinated among the assembled leaders. Their earlier apprehension was now tempered with a cautious curiosity, each ambassador absorbing the gravity of the shared threat with a pensive silence. The Threxian delegate, whose chitinous exterior usually bristled with aggressive spikes, seemed to soften, his barbs retracting slightly as he leaned forward. "Captain Voss, if your claims are substantiated, we must discuss the nature of our collaborative response." "Indeed, we should," Arjun agreed, his voice resonating with a resolve as unyielding as the metal walls that encased them. He turned to his communications officer, a young ensign named Milo, and nodded. With a deft flick, Milo transmitted a series of encrypted files to the Council's central console, each file a detailed dossier of the threat assessments and strategic countermeasures. As the data streamed in, the soft glow of the console illuminated the faces of the Council members, casting long shadows that flickered like the doubts that had once clouded their judgment. Arjun continued. "Our proposal includes a joint task force, shared intelligence, and coordinated defense systems. It's imperative we act swiftly and decisively." The Aquarid ambassador, his features now a calm pool of contemplation, spoke next. "Your technology is advanced, Captain. How do we ensure transparency in this alliance?" Arjun's response was immediate, his tone imbued with sincerity. "We will establish an oversight committee featuring representatives from all factions. Every strategic move will be open for review and approval. We seek trust, and will earn it through openness." A subtle aroma of brewed stimulants wafted from the lounge adjacent to the council chamber, a reminder of the long hours they had all endured. The bitter scent mingled with the sterile air, a stark contrast to the warmth of budding alliances forming in the room. Gregor, standing beside a holographic display of the galaxy, highlighted zones of potential conflict and proposed placements for their combined fleets. "These are the hotspots. If we fortify these, we can create a buffer while we work on neutralizing the weapon." The chamber was silent as the hologram spun slowly, stars and planets orbiting in a quiet dance of celestial mechanics. Each delegate watched, their eyes reflecting the starlight, their minds perhaps seeing their homeworlds among the twinkling lights, each now threatened by a common foe. "We need not just a response, but a proactive stance," Arjun added, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting eyes, challenging each leader to rise above past conflicts. "This is more than survival. It's about forging a legacy of cooperation that could redefine our place in the cosmos." The metaphorical weight of his words hung in the air like the afterglow of a supernova, bright, piercing, and transformative. As the session adjourned, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a sense that the frost of distrust was slowly melting under the warmth of newfound alliances. Outside the thick glass of the council station, the galaxy spun in silent majesty, indifferent to the fates being decided within. But for those who had gathered, bound by necessity and a shared sense of destiny, the stars seemed a little less distant than before. As the newly formed alliance convened to outline their collective strategy, Captain Arjun Voss stood slightly apart, his eyes scanning the vast panorama of space displayed before them. The council chamber was quieter now, the initial turmoil subsiding into a focused hush, punctuated only by the soft tapping of data pads and the occasional murmur of deliberation. "We agree on the formation of the task force, but who will lead it?" queried the Threxian delegate, his voice sharp, cutting through the low buzz of conversation like a laser through the dark. Arjun turned, his posture relaxed yet authoritative. "I propose a rotational leadership," he suggested, his voice carrying a timbre of fairness and diplomacy. "Each member species will command the task force in turn, based on a strategic evaluation of the threat's proximity to their territory." The suggestion hung in the air, dense as the aroma of strong caffeine that permeated from the lounge, invigorating and bitter. The delegates nodded, the idea taking root, growing in acceptance as they discussed logistics and implications. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Harrow approached Arjun, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Captain, while they plan, we might have a slight problem. The sensors have picked up anomalous readings. It's faint, but it's there, like whispers in the void." Arjun's gaze sharpened, his senses heightening at the news. "Show me," he commanded quietly, stepping away from the negotiating table to a quieter corner of the room. Harrow handed him a portable scanner, its screen flickering with the irregular data patterns. "These aren't just echoes. They're deliberate, encrypted signals," Harrow explained, his voice low and urgent. "Someone, or something, is observing us." Chewing on the inside of his cheek, Arjun considered the implications. The thought of an unseen observer sent a chill down his spine, cold as the void outside. He needed to act, but without alarming the Council prematurely. "Keep monitoring it and enhance decryption." "We need to know who's behind this and what their intentions are," Arjun instructed, his voice a whisper, barely a vibration in the sterile air of the chamber. As he turned back to the delegates, his mind raced. The presence of a spy could undermine everything they were trying to build. The scent of suspicion was now a tangible presence, mixing with the sterile coolness of the chamber, and he could almost taste the metallic tang of fear. "Captain Voss, your input is needed," called the Aquarid ambassador, beckoning him back to the table. Arjun moved forward, his senses alert to every shift in the room, every glance, every slight change in tone. "Forgive my absence. I was assessing a potential security concern," Arjun said smoothly, his words measured, maintaining a calm facade while his mind worked furiously behind it. As the meeting progressed, strategies and plans were laid out like a star map, each point a beacon in the shadowy uncertainty of their situation. Yet Arjun's thoughts were elsewhere, on the invisible threads being pulled in the dark. Who was watching them, and why? The mystery deepened, the answers as elusive as a comet's tail, and he knew the path they were on would test them all. As the strategic planning unfolded, Captain Arjun Voss's mind lingered on the enigmatic signals that Lieutenant Harrow had detected. Amid the ordered chaos of discussions and digital displays, the whisper of potential danger resonated like a dissonant chord in the symphony of their collaboration. Arjun convened a discreet meeting in a less frequented part of the council station, away from the prying ears of the main chamber. The room was stark, the only light emanating from a single luminescent panel overhead, casting sharp shadows that sliced through the dimness. "Update," Arjun stated simply as Harrow activated a series of projections, the images flickering briefly before stabilizing. "We've isolated the signal's origin," Harrow reported, his fingers gliding over the data pad, enhancing the satellite images. "It's coming from a derelict sector. Old mining colonies, long abandoned, no official traffic in decades." The cold emptiness of the sector mirrored the chill Arjun felt. The implications were troubling. The use of a ghost sector for clandestine observations suggested a meticulous and covert adversary. "What about the encryption?" Arjun pressed, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of data. "Partially cracked. It's sophisticated beyond most known technologies," Harrow confessed, his tone a mixture of admiration and concern. "Whoever is behind this, they're not amateurs." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with the scent of ozone that leaked from the old, overworked environmental systems. It was a sharp reminder of the station's age and the secrets it might hold within its corroded walls. "We need to send a recon team," Arjun decided, the words tasting of resolve mixed with the metallic tinge of apprehension. "If someone is watching, I want to know who and why. Prepare the shuttle. I'll lead the mission myself." Harrow nodded, his expression somber. "I'll coordinate with the security teams and ensure your visit remains under the radar." As Arjun prepared to leave, the door slid open with a whisper, revealing Gregor, his presence almost ghostly in the subdued lighting. "Captain, the Council is requesting your attendance. They're moving to finalize the joint defense outline." "Tell them I'll be there shortly," Arjun responded, his stride purposeful as he exited into the brighter corridors of the station. The transition from shadow to light was jarring, a stark contrast that paralleled the hidden depths of their situation. Walking back to the council chamber, Arjun felt the weight of his dual responsibilities, the overt diplomatic efforts and the covert investigation into the mysterious observer. Each step seemed echoed by the soft thrum of the station's life support systems, a constant reminder of the life hanging in balance. As he re-entered the council chamber, the buzz of conversation enveloped him, a cacophony of concerns and strategic debates. The air was thick with the heat of deliberation and the faint aroma of synthetic coffee, offering a semblance of normalcy amid the brewing storm. Resuming his place at the table, Arjun's presence was like a keystone, aligning the fragmented discussions into a semblance of order. Yet beneath the surface of every conversation, the silent pulse of hidden truths beat a rhythm of impending revelation, keeping the tension palpably high and the council members unwittingly on the edge of their seats. The council's discourse hummed with the low, rhythmic pulse of strategic planning as Captain Arjun Voss excused himself to lead the covert recon mission. Each step away from the chamber echoed softly, his boots cushioning against the aged metal of the station's floors, which whispered tales of times when peace was not merely a fragile truce, but a forgotten legacy. Outside, the cosmos sprawled in a breathtaking expanse, stars strewn across the black canvas like scattered jewels. The shuttle awaiting him was sleek, its surface a mirror to the universe's enigma, reflecting nebulae and the distant shimmer of galaxies. "Everything's ready, Captain," Harrow reported, his voice crisp in the shuttle's controlled environment. The interior was stark, illuminated by panels casting a clean, clinical glow that sharpened the edges of every console and seat. "Let's not keep our mystery host waiting, then," Arjun replied, securing himself into the pilot's chair. The launch was smooth, the shuttle slipping from the station's embrace like a silent phantom, free from the gravitational pull and political weight alike. As they approached the derelict sector, the void seemed to compress, darkness deepening, the stars less frequent, and their light dimmer. The silence of space was absolute, unmarred by the usual hum of active sectors. Here, the absence of sound was its own entity, a vacuum filling the space with anticipatory tension. Harrow monitored the instruments, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We're close. The signal's getting stronger, and there, isolated on that asteroid." The target was an asteroid, pockmarked and rugged, its surface a testament to cosmic battles waged in silence. They landed in a cloud of dust that clung to the rocks like a fine gray veil. Arjun's first step onto the asteroid sent a plume of this cosmic dust swirling around his boots, each particle glittering briefly before settling back into the moon's desolate landscape. "This was an outpost once," Arjun mused aloud, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying clearly in the shuttle's comms. "Seems like someone's interested in its past, or perhaps what it's hiding." They moved through the ruins, beams of their flashlights slicing through the darkness, uncovering layers of abandonment and decay. Each beam reflected off surfaces covered in a thin film of ice, casting eerie shadows that danced just at the edge of vision. Suddenly Harrow stopped, gesturing to a nondescript panel obscured by years of dust and disuse. Swiping his glove across, he revealed a keypad, its buttons worn but still functional. "Looks like this section was sealed off. Could be something, or someone, behind here." With a shared nod, they prepared to breach the seal. Arjun keyed in a standard override code, the panel blinking hesitantly before the door groaned open, protesting the disturbance after decades of quiescence. The room beyond was a capsule of time, preserved and untouched. The air was stale, filled with the scent of old metal and the faint, musty odor of decay. But it was what lay in the center of the room that caught their attention, a console, still operational, blinking softly in the gloom. "This isn't just surveillance," Arjun said, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place as he approached the console. "It's a beacon." As he activated the console, the screen flickered to life, displaying a map studded with coordinates and a countdown that was ominously close to zero. "Looks like we're not the only ones playing a deep game," he murmured, the realization dawning that they might have stumbled upon something far greater and more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. Staring at the blinking coordinates and the ominously ticking countdown, Captain Arjun Voss felt a cold shiver trace his spine. The revelation of the console, not just as a monitoring station but as a beacon, was a twist he hadn't anticipated. He glanced at Lieutenant Harrow, whose eyes were wide, reflecting the pale light of the console's display. "This changes everything," Harrow muttered, adjusting his stance as if bracing against an unseen storm. Arjun nodded slowly, his mind racing through the implications. We need to understand exactly what this countdown is leading to. Any ideas on the final zero? Harrow leaned closer, analyzing the data stream with a practiced eye. It's not just a timer. It looks like it's syncing with something external. Another device, or perhaps a series of devices. We're looking at a network, and this asteroid is part of it. The stark, icy silence of the abandoned outpost seemed to grow denser with their discovery. The air was crisp, carrying a residual chill that seeped through their suits, making the atmosphere inside the room feel as if it were closing in on them. Let's trace the signal's path, Arjun suggested, tapping commands into the console. The map expanded, revealing a complex web of connections spreading across the sector. Each node blinked softly, a silent yet vivid testimony to a plan set quietly into motion years, perhaps decades ago. The implications were daunting. If they were right, they were standing at the brink of a coordinated event that could ripple across known space, affecting countless lives. Arjun felt the weight of their discovery. It was palpable, like the heavy metallic tang of the air they breathed, filled with the scent of old electronics and dormant secrets. Harrow's voice broke through his contemplation. Captain, there's something else here. This code. It looks like it was meant to be found, almost like a breadcrumb trail. Left deliberately? Arjun's voice was skeptical, the concept unsettling. For us, or someone else? Unclear, Harrow admitted. His brow creased as he delved deeper into the code. But it's sophisticated. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing and understood we might one day catch up. Arjun's gaze returned to the screen where the web of connections pulsed faintly against the backdrop of the galaxy map. Each node was a silent beacon, calling out to its unseen counterparts, a network of whispers in the void. We need to report this back to the Council, Arjun decided with a determined exhale, the coolness of the room seeming to condense around his decision. But first, we secure this outpost. No one else comes in until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. As they prepared to leave, securing the data they had gathered, Arjun took one last look at the console. The countdown continued, relentless and indifferent to their discovery, ticking down towards an unknown climax. With a quiet resolve, Arjun led the way back to the shuttle, the taste of impending confrontation bitter on his tongue. Each step echoed slightly in the empty corridors, a reminder of the isolation of their position on the edge of civilized space, on the brink of uncovering a threat woven deeply into the fabric of the galaxy. Returning to the Council station with the weight of their grim discovery, Captain Arjun Voss felt the shuttle's vibrations through his seat, a subtle reminder of their precarious journey back to the realm of political maneuvering and alliance building. The stars outside the viewport seemed to flicker with a knowing intensity, as if reflecting the urgency of the mission that now lay before them. Upon docking, Arjun and Lieutenant Harrow were met with the expectant faces of their crew, their expressions a mixture of concern and determination. Without missing a beat, Arjun led them through the dimly lit corridors of the station, the scent of recirculated air mingling with a faint trace of ionization from the electrical systems, creating an almost palpable tension. We've uncovered something significant, Arjun briefed his team as they assembled in the strategy room, the walls lined with screens displaying star maps and data feeds. This isn't just surveillance. It's preparation for something larger, something orchestrated. Harrow stepped forward, loading the encrypted data onto the main display. Each node we discovered is linked, part of a network that's set to activate upon that countdown reaching zero. What it activates, however, remains unclear. The team leaned in, their focus sharp, as the network of connections illuminated the room in a soft glow, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch ominously. The graphical representation of the network was like a spider's web, intricate and deliberate, each thread a potential trigger for unknown consequences. Could this be a weapon? One of the tactical officers, Commander Jensen, asked, his voice steady but laced with underlying concern. Possibly, Arjun acknowledged, tapping a finger against his lip in thought. Or a signal. We need to consider all possibilities and prepare for each. The room buzzed with low voices as they contemplated their next moves. The strategy was clear. They needed to disable the network before the countdown concluded, but doing so without knowing the full repercussions required careful planning and precise execution. Let's set up simulations for each scenario, Arjun decided, his directive slicing through the murmurs like a blade. I want options on the table within the hour. Harrow, work with communications. See if you can intercept any further signals from those nodes. We need more to go on. As the team dispersed to their respective tasks, Arjun stood by the viewport, watching the artificial lights of the station flicker against the backdrop of deep space. The darkness out there was vast and filled with unknowns, but so too was their resolve to illuminate those shadows with discovery and defense. In the quiet of the strategy room, now emptied of all but the low hum of computers, Arjun pondered the network map. Each node pulsed softly on the screen, a beacon of both danger and opportunity. It was a mystery wrapped in the cosmos itself, each pulse a countdown to a revelation that would undoubtedly shake their understanding of security and space. With a deep breath, Arjun turned back to the console, his movements deliberate. The taste of impending action was sharp on his tongue, a flavor not unlike the charged anticipation before a storm. As he set to work, the strategy room felt like the calm at the center of an impending tempest, ready to unfold. Captain Arjun Voss moved swiftly down the station's corridor, the echo of his boots absorbed by the dense composite flooring. Every step carried the weight of unfolding revelation, each new discovery pulling them further into the unknown. The station's artificial lighting cast long, stark shadows on the metallic walls, stretching and twisting with his movement. Reaching the intelligence deck, he found Lieutenant Harrow hunched over a console, the glow of decryption screens reflecting in his focused eyes. The air in the room carried the sterile bite of recycled oxygen, but beneath it was something more, an edge of tension, a presence that lingered like static before a lightning strike. Harrow glanced up, the strain evident in the furrow of his brow. "Captain, we cracked part of the transmissions. The signals weren't just data exchanges. They were instructions." Arjun's fingers curled into a fist at his side. "For what?" Harrow keyed in a command, and a visual projection flared to life above the console. A series of automated directives, each encoded with layers of security. As the decryption software unraveled the lines, a chilling truth emerged. "They're activation codes," Harrow said, voice edged with disbelief. "Each of these nodes isn't just transmitting. They're waiting for a final command. When the countdown hits 0, they won't just send a signal. They'll trigger something." Arjun's jaw tightened. "A coordinated attack?" "Or worse," Harrow said, voice low. "Look at this." He expanded one of the decrypted strings, revealing a cascading map of energy fluctuations across multiple systems. "These aren't traditional weapon signatures. They're gravitational distortions. Whatever's being activated, it's altering space itself." The implications sank deep, like ice water in the veins. Arjun exhaled through his nose, forcing clarity over alarm. "Can we pinpoint the central control point? Whoever orchestrated this must have a master terminal." Harrow shook his head. "Not yet. But based on the signal strength, the origin isn't far. It's within the Council's monitored space." Arjun's stomach coiled. "Which means someone here, one of these factions, is either complicit or has been infiltrated." The thought sent a fresh wave of urgency through him. The council chamber was filled with politicians, diplomats, and military leaders, each a potential ally, each a potential threat. "We need a contingency," Arjun said, straightening. "If we can't disable the network in time, we need to be ready for the fallout. Start running tactical projections on worst-case scenarios. Get Gregor on data filtration. We need to isolate any anomalies in council communication channels. Someone in that room knows more than they're letting on." Harrow gave a curt nod and turned back to his station, fingers flying over the console as Arjun pivoted sharply toward the exit. The corridor stretched before him, a steel-lined pathway between discovery and disaster. Every ticking second brought them closer to an irreversible moment. The countdown loomed, its finality pressing against them like the weight of an unseen predator, waiting for its moment to strike. Arjun quickened his pace. The storm was coming, and when it broke, no one in this station, perhaps no one in the galaxy, would remain untouched. Captain Arjun Voss strode into the war room, his pulse steady, despite the weight of the revelation pressing against his thoughts. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, their sterile glow casting sharp contrasts against the metallic walls. His officers were already gathered, faces taut with focus, the low murmurs of tactical discussions dying the moment he stepped in. Lieutenant Harrow turned from his console, eyes sharp with urgency. "We isolated irregularities in the Council's secure network. Someone is feeding encrypted data to an external source, but they're using relay points to mask the origin." Arjun exhaled slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. Which factions had access to the Council's security grid before the network activation began? Gregor tapped on his display, a list materializing on the central screen. Only high-clearance personnel from 3 delegations. If we cross-reference their known movements with the data transmission timestamps, we might get a lead. Arjun's gaze flicked across the names, memorizing them as if he could dissect their intent just by looking. He moved closer to the console, the cold surface beneath his fingertips grounding him in the moment. "We don't have time for a slow investigation. If we can't cut this network off before the countdown ends, we risk triggering something that could reshape entire sectors." Commander Jensen, standing near the far side of the room, folded his arms. "We could pull the suspect delegates in for questioning." "No," Arjun said immediately. "Not yet. If we tip our hand too soon, the real culprit will adjust. We need to act as if we haven't discovered anything." Harrow nodded, already parsing through the data streams. "I'll keep tracking the transmission origin. If we can catch the next outgoing message, we might be able to trace it to the recipient." Arjun straightened, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension coiling between his shoulder blades. The weight of strategy pressed against his chest, heavier than any battlefield armor. "Good. Meanwhile, we prepare for worst-case scenarios. If this activation sequence completes, we need to contain the damage." The scent of heated metal from the nearby analysis terminals mixed with the sterile sharpness of the recycled air, adding an edge to the already tense atmosphere. Outside the station, the void remained deceptively quiet, the stars indifferent to the storm brewing within these walls. A soft chime from the console cut through the silence. Gregor's expression darkened. "Captain, the countdown just accelerated." Arjun's pulse quickened. "How much time do we have?" "Less than 2 hours," Gregor confirmed. "Whatever this network is designed to do, it's moving ahead of schedule." Arjun clenched his jaw, the urgency like a slow burn beneath his skin. The enemy had anticipated interference. Now they were forcing their hand. "Then we don't wait for answers," Arjun said, his voice like tempered steel. "We go in, and we shut it down ourselves." The room stirred with the shift in tone, officers nodding as they moved with renewed urgency. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. And if they didn't act fast, the galaxy might never recover from what came next. The war room pulsed with urgency, every officer locked into their tasks, their movements brisk, purposeful. Captain Arjun Voss absorbed the weight of the moment, the flickering glow of data streams reflecting against his sharp gaze. The countdown, once distant, now loomed over them like a blade suspended by a fraying thread. 2 hours. Less now. Lieutenant Harrow's fingers flew over the control panel, his jaw tight. "Captain, I've isolated a direct relay. Someone on this station is still transmitting. They're adapting the encryption with each pulse. They know we're closing in." Arjun's breath steadied, his mind sharpening with the clarity of a battlefield commander. "Can you disrupt it?" Harrow didn't look up. "Not fully. I can delay it, slow their adjustments, but unless we reach the source, they'll reconfigure faster than we can counter." Commander Jensen leaned in, his voice clipped. "We can't chase shadows. We need to lock this station down. Disable outgoing transmissions and filter every security feed." "Not yet," Arjun countered, his voice measured. "If we sever their link now, they'll cut and run before we get to them. We let them think they're ahead, then we follow the trail back to its source. The air carried the faint trace of overheating circuits, a sharp contrast to the chilled bite of the station's filtered atmosphere. The tension coiled tighter, a silent force pressing against every breath. Gregor, hunched over a separate console, let out a slow exhale. "Captain, I've mapped the relay's frequency adjustments. It's not random. It's pulsing in intervals, short, long, then short again." Arjun frowned. "A pattern?" Gregor nodded. "A countdown of its own. It's not just tracking time. It's signaling something." Harrow's fingers stilled for a fraction of a second. "Captain, if that's true, someone, somewhere, is waiting for confirmation before the sequence finalizes." Silence gripped the room, only the distant whir of processors filling the space between thoughts. Arjun's gaze darted back to the countdown on the main screen. The implication settled like ice in his veins. "They're not just activating something," he said, his voice low, firm. "They're waiting for clearance to strike." Jensen's expression darkened. "That means we're running against two clocks, the one we see and the one they're setting." Arjun turned to Harrow. "How fast can you reverse trace the most recent transmission?" Harrow's fingers flexed, his jaw tightening. "If I push the system to full decryption capacity, 10 minutes. "You have 5, Arjun said, the authority in his voice like the pull of gravity, inescapable. The officers moved, their focus honed into singular purpose. Across the station, hidden eyes likely watched, unseen hands adjusting their pieces on the board. The enemy had planned for resistance, but they hadn't planned for Arjun Voss. Time pressed forward, like an accelerating tide, and as Arjun braced himself for the next move, he knew this was no longer about uncovering a secret. It was about stopping a war before the first shot was even fired. The war room was now a crucible of strategy, minds sharpening under pressure. Captain Arjun Voss stood at the center, his focus a razor's edge as Harrow raced against time to decrypt the last transmission. Every second bled into the countdown, pulling them toward an outcome they had yet to define. "Status?" Arjun asked without looking away from the central display. Harrow's fingers danced over the interface, his jaw set. 2 minutes to full trace. Whoever's sending these signals is cautious, short bursts, randomized exit points. But we forced their hand. They're adjusting too fast. That means they know we're on them." Arjun's expression hardened. "They think they have the advantage." He turned to Gregor. "Worst case scenario. We don't stop this transmission in time. What happens?" Gregor exhaled through his nose, his gaze locked on the growing matrix of projections. "If this network operates the way I suspect, it won't be a single detonation or localized attack. This is a staged event, meaning each activation leads to a secondary trigger, then another. We're looking at a cascading failure across key infrastructures." Jensen folded his arms. "How do we sever it?" Arjun studied the sprawling data stream, eyes narrowing as he calculated the layers of interference. "We fight the chain reaction. Instead of shutting down the network, we feed it false confirmations. If we send a countersignal, matching their expected response, we can stagger their timeline." Harrow nodded, catching on to the plan. "We mimic their relay codes, delaying activation at each node. It won't buy us much time, but it'll keep the system from finalizing." Gregor's brow furrowed. "That only buys us minutes." Arjun glanced at him. "Minutes are enough if we use them right." He turned back to the room, his voice commanding. "Jensen, I need security details sweeping every section of the station where the signal could originate. Deploy in silent approach. Whoever's behind this, we don't spook them until we have proof." Jensen nodded and tapped into his comms, giving orders to the teams. "Harrow, as soon as you have the full trace, isolate the exact location. No broader lockdowns yet. We don't tip them off. Gregor, you'll handle the counter signals. Feed the system confirmations in staggered intervals." Gregor scratched his chin. "They'll catch on eventually." Arjun's voice was ice. "We don't need eventually. We need now." A sharp chime sounded from Harrow's station. His eyes flicked to the screen and his voice carried urgency. "I've got the origin." The war room stilled. Arjun strode to Harrow's side, scanning the readout. The location flashed on the screen, a sector within the Council's own secured district. Arjun's pulse slowed, his instincts sharpening. "They're not some external force," he murmured. "They're here." Jensen's voice was steel. "That means they're watching us." The war room, once a chamber of calculation, became something else entirely. This wasn't just a strategy session anymore. It was a battlefield. The war room shifted from strategy to execution. Captain Arjun Voss absorbed the weight of their revelation. The source of the transmissions was inside the Council's own secured district. The enemy wasn't infiltrating from the outside. They were already woven into the fabric of this station, watching, waiting. "Jensen," Arjun ordered, his voice sharp, "assemble a covert strike team. No unnecessary engagement. We need them alive for interrogation." Jensen nodded, already issuing silent commands to his security unit. "Harrow, keep feeding the false confirmations," Arjun continued. "We stagger their activation long enough to move in." Harrow's fingers skimmed across the console, rerouting command inputs. "Buying us another 10 minutes, maybe more, but they'll notice." "They only need to notice when it's too late," Arjun replied. His focus shifted to Gregor. "Status on a station-wide containment protocol?" Gregor exhaled, scanning his readouts. "Security overrides in place. Once we breach their location, I can lock the entire sector down. No one gets in or out." "Do it on my signal," Arjun instructed, his pulse steady. "If they realize we've found them before we engage, they'll wipe their data and vanish. We take them alive or not at all." Jensen's team moved with precise efficiency, their boots whispering against the reinforced flooring as they left the war room. The station's artificial lighting dimmed slightly as power rerouted through encrypted channels, further concealing their operation. Arjun activated his earpiece. "Jensen, position?" The reply came through immediately. "Closing in on the secured district. No visual yet." The corridor leading to the target zone stretched ahead, illuminated only by the cold glow of guidance strips along the walls. The station's automated ventilation whispered overhead, a steady cycle of air pressure shifts that masked the subtle sounds of their approach. A red indicator blinked on Gregor's console. "They just pinged the network. Something triggered an alert on their end." "Did they detect us?" Arjun asked, his pace quickening. "Not yet," Gregor replied. "But they're running a system diagnostic. If they spot the false confirmations, they'll cut their losses and vanish." Jensen's voice crackled through the earpiece. "We're outside their section. Scanners show 6 bodies inside, armed." Arjun calculated the odds. A direct confrontation risked setting off a kill switch, wiping every trace of their operations. That wasn't an option. "Deploy an electromagnetic pulse," Arjun ordered. "Short range, non-lethal. Kill their systems before they react," Jensen acknowledged. A beat later, Gregor's console flickered. "EMP deployed. Their grid's dark." "Go," Arjun commanded. The strike team breached the door, their movements swift. Through the audio feed, Arjun heard a scuffle, shouts, a crash, a weapon clattering to the floor. Then Jensen's voice, controlled but triumphant. "Hostiles secured. They never saw it coming." Arjun exhaled, his grip on the table easing. "Good. Containment's holding?" Gregor checked the systems. "Locked down. They have nowhere to run." Arjun straightened. "Then let's see what secrets they've been so desperate to keep." The next phase had begun. The interrogation chamber was silent, save for the rhythmic drip of condensation from the overhead coolant vents. Captain Arjun Voss stood at the threshold, eyes narrowing at the restrained figures before him. 6 captives. Their expressions ranged from cold defiance to uneasy calculation. One of them, an older, sharp-featured officer in the Council's diplomatic uniform, lifted his chin in challenge. "You've already lost," the man sneered. "You just don't know it yet." Arjun stepped forward, his movements deliberate. The dim lighting cast his shadow long across the floor, stretching toward the prisoners like an unspoken threat. He pulled a chair from the side and sat, leveling his gaze at the speaker. "You had control," Arjun admitted, voice measured. "You had secrecy." You had time. He leaned in slightly. But you made a mistake. The officer smirked. And what was that, Captain? Arjun's lips curled at the edges, not in amusement, but in certainty. You underestimated us. A flicker of something, uncertainty, frustration, crossed the prisoner's face. He recovered quickly, but not before Arjun caught it. Good. They weren't as untouchable as they thought. Jensen stood at the console, monitoring the data streaming in from the secured terminals. We decrypted your last transmission. You weren't just signaling an attack. You were waiting for permission to stand down. The room turned brittle. One of the captives, a younger operative with sweat beading on his temple, clenched his jaw but didn't speak. Arjun shifted, his voice dropping to something colder. That means you're not the architects of this plan. You're tools, and tools can be discarded. The older officer's smirk faltered. Harrow, standing by the entrance, tapped his data pad. Captain, we've traced their transmissions further. There's another warship out there, not Council, not ours. His fingers flew over the screen. It's been watching this entire time. Arjun exhaled, the air tasting of cold steel and tension. And now they know their operatives failed. The officer laughed, the sound dry and bitter. So what? You think they'll abandon their mission just because you caught us? No, Captain, they'll adapt. They'll move faster. You've only accelerated the inevitable. Arjun rose, towering over the prisoners. You assume we're afraid of inevitability. His voice carried through the chamber like a blade sliding into its sheath, controlled, deadly. You think because you've manipulated these governments, hidden in their shadows, that no one can stand against you. He turned to Jensen. Get the Sovereign combat ready. We move now, the officer scoffed. A single warship against an unseen fleet? Your arrogance is almost admirable. Arjun looked down at him, expression unreadable. You've spent too long believing humanity is weak, that we don't belong in this conflict. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You're about to find out just how wrong you are. The countdown had reached 0. The next move belonged to them. The Sovereign tore through the void, cutting across the darkness like a blade, seeking its mark. Captain Arjun Voss stood on the command deck, his gaze fixed on the sensor readout. The enemy warship had been lurking in the shadows, observing, waiting for confirmation that their plan had succeeded. Instead, they were about to witness its failure firsthand. Jensen's voice broke through the tension. We have visual. On the main display, the warship emerged from the black, a monstrous construct of unfamiliar design, its hull reflecting starlight like a predator lying in wait. No insignia, no markings, just raw, unspoken intent. They're not fleeing, Harrow noted. His fingers hovered over the tactical console. They're holding position. Arjun's jaw tightened. They're testing us. Silence settled across the bridge, thick with anticipation. The Sovereign's systems ran hot, weapons primed, shields raised. The crew knew what this meant. This wasn't just a battle, it was a declaration. The enemy ship broadcasted its first message. No preamble, no diplomacy. Stand down. Humanity does not understand what it is facing. Arjun exhaled slowly, the air sharp against his lungs. He stepped forward, his voice steady as he responded. We understand enough. You thought you could hide in the dark. We brought the light. For the first time, the enemy moved. Their ship realigned, adjusting its trajectory. Arjun recognized the intent. A positioning maneuver, a warning before a strike. Jensen's grip on the console tightened. Orders? Arjun's expression didn't shift. Charge the main batteries, target their weapons systems. A pause. Then another transmission. Your kind cannot win. Arjun's lips curled into something between amusement and certainty. You think we came here to win? You think we need permission to exist? You look at us and see primitive animals. You see fragility. We see something you fear, the capacity to adapt, to endure, to change the course of a war before it even starts. Silence from the enemy ship. Gregor's voice was tight. They're recalibrating, powering something large. Arjun gave a slow nod as if he had been expecting it. All batteries, fire! The Sovereign unleashed its first barrage. The space between them erupted in a blaze of calculated destruction. Energy lanced forward, striking true, carving into the enemy vessel's exposed flank, a split-second hesitation from their opponent. Then, chaos. Explosions rippled across their hull, cascading like a star-going nova. The enemy vessel twisted, its structure fracturing under the precision of human warfare. For all its secrecy, its intelligence, its technological edge, it hadn't expected to bleed. Jensen's voice rang out, edged with awe. "They're retreating." Arjun watched as the ship, once so sure of its superiority, flickered from their screens, vanishing into the abyss. He turned back to his crew, his voice calm but unyielding. This was their warning. Now they know. Silence fell over the bridge, not from fear but from understanding. The arrival of a human warship had changed everything, and the galaxy would never forget it.